Welcome to today's deep dive. So picture this scenario for a second. You have spent months, and I mean literally months, crafting what you think is this brilliant, just visionary, grand strategy for your business.
Oh, yeah, the one with the perfect slide deck.
Right. The presentations were flawless. The board approved it. Everybody gave it a nice round of applause. But then, Friday afternoon rolls around.
As it always does.
Exactly. You look at the actual orders coming in, you look at the raw materials sitting on your loading dock, and you realize your resources and your actual real-world demands are completely, hopelessly out of whack.
It's the ultimate corporate reality check, really.
It is. And so the big question is, how do the best companies actually resolve this massive tension between, what they projected in the boardroom and what is physically possible on the warehouse floor?
Because, a business plan is essentially a work of fiction until you can prove you possess the physical and operational capacity to actually deliver on it.
Which brings us to the core mission of today's deep dive. We are exploring the really intense and often highly political process of reconciling sales and operations planning, or S&OP.
Yeah, S&OP process.
Right. Based on our source material, we're going to unpack how companies pull levers to change supply and prioritize demand, the hidden risks inside their alternative plans, and how the underlying production strategy dictates the kind of sacrifices an organization has to make.
And it really is about sacrificing.
Totally. We're also going to look at how perfectly rational leaders still manage to completely derail these approved plans.
Well, S&OP reconciliation is really where the rubber meets the road. It's this highly structured process of making really difficult trade-offs.
Yeah.
Because the goal is to ensure that a company's day-to-day production plan genuinely aligns with its strategic business plan. Without this reconciliation step, you don't actually have a strategy. You just have, an unvetted wish list.
A wish list. Yeah, I like that. So let's start with that immediate crisis, supply and demand being entirely out of sync. From a high-level perspective, decision makers basically have two levers they can pull, right?
Right, just two.
They can adjust their physical resources, like the supply side, or they can actively mess with the demand side. Let's look at supply first. What are the actual mechanisms of changing a resource plan when you're facing a severe capacity shortfall?
So when a company needs to alter its supply capabilities, they're evaluating a mix of physical changes and human resource changes. The physical side usually involves significant capital expenditure and lead time, of course.
Like building new factories?
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about massive strategic moves. Acquiring another company to absorb their manufacturing capacity, opening a brand new facility, or on the flip side, shutting an underperforming one down.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It also includes adding or removing heavy equipment and tooling.
But, reading through the sources, they seem to suggest that adjusting the physical footprint is actually the easier part of the equation compared to the human element.
Oh, absolutely. Because machines don't have learning curves or, morale problems.
That's a great point.
The human resources moves are incredibly complex. If you need to scale up quickly, you're looking at huge hiring surges, completely restructuring shift patterns, or investing heavily in education and training to get your current workforce capable of running a new product line.
And I guess scaling down is even worse.
Yeah, scaling down involves painful layoffs, and the source material emphasizes that a modern supply plan has to build in agility. You can't just rely on the physical assets and people you own.
Right.
You have to utilize outsourcing and subcontracting to handle sudden spikes in demand without, committing to permanent long-term structural changes.
Okay, I want to pivot to the second lever because actively managing the customer, the demand side, seems much riskier.
It definitely can be.
Right, because if scaling up your supply takes too long or costs too much, the sources say you have to prioritize demand. Which honestly sounds like a polite way of saying you have to purposefully tell certain clients they aren't getting what they paid for.
It is a really delicate negotiation, absolutely. We often think of demand as this uncontrollable force of nature, but at the S&OP level, demand management is highly active.
How so?
Well, it involves planning, communicating, influencing, and prioritizing. You are actively shaping the demand to fit the supply you actually have on hand.
So thinking about this, it kind of reminds me of hosting a massive dinner party.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Like, say, a way more guests RSVP than you expected. You really only have two options. You either have to cook way faster and maybe go buy another oven, which is changing your supply, or you have to convince some of the guests that they actually want the cheaper pasta substitute instead of the steak they were promised.
That is the perfect analogy, prioritizing the demand.
And the sources outline two specific examples of this, right? Resequencing demand priorities and convincing customers to accept substitute products. Let's break down the mechanics of resequencing first. How does a company actually execute that without burning bridges?
Right, so resequencing means looking at your order book and making hard, very strategic choices about who gets their product first. You aren't just looking at who ordered first, like a first come, first serve thing.
Yeah, it's not a deli line.
Exactly. You are evaluating the strategic importance of the client, the margin on the specific order, and the long-term relationship value.
So you're playing favorites.
Essentially, yes. You might have to call a mid-tier client and explain that their delivery is delayed by 3 months, fully knowing they might be furious, because you desperately need that capacity to fulfill an order for your most lucrative Tier 1 client.
Ouch. And substitution operates on a similar logic, right?
Yeah.
If you're entirely out of, say, the specific microchip a client ordered, your sales and engineering teams have to collaborate to convince that client's procurement department that a slightly different chip like one you just happen to have sitting in excess inventory will work just as well for their application.
Precisely. You're influencing what they want. And the big picture takeaway here is that at the S&OP level, the primary currency being evaluated is volume.
Volume.
Right. It's not about the granular details of individual shipments just yet. It's about synchronizing the total volume of supply with the total volume of demand, usually at the product family level.
So management evaluates the total volume. They know they have to pull either the supply lever or the demand lever. But how do they actually model out the financial impact of those choices?
Well, they use baselines.
Right. The sources point to 3 alternative baselines for planning: undertime, overtime, and outside contracting. And the golden rule is that these alternatives must optimize both cost and value.
Right.
Let's start with undertime, because frankly, to anyone outside of operations, paying a workforce to work below capacity sounds like a massive failure of management. How does that optimize cost?
I know, it sounds incredibly counterintuitive. But undertime is a very real, highly calculated baseline. Undertime basically means you keep your workforce intact, but you intentionally reduce their hours or have them working at less than full capacity during a period of low demand.
Wait, so you're just paying people to sit around?
In a way, yes. The company actively chooses to eat the cost of their idle time.
Because the alternative, laying them off just to save cash today, destroys your agility for tomorrow.
Exactly. If you lay off a highly skilled workforce, you lose all their tacit knowledge.
Right.
When demand eventually spikes again, the cost of recruiting, hiring, training, and absorbing the huge defect rates of brand new employees is often vastly more expensive than the cash you would have burned by just paying your original team to endure the undertime.
Okay, that actually tracks. And then overtime is the obvious inverse, right? Pushing your current workforce beyond their standard capacity.
Right.
And outside contracting gives you agility by leveraging a third party's supply. So theoretically, you model out these 3 baselines, the financial software calculates the overhead, and you just pick the cheapest option.
Theoretically, yeah.
But the source material throws a massive wrench into this. It explicitly states that true risks are organization-specific, and that decision makers must consider the pluses and minuses not in the analysis.
Yes, that is a huge point.
I really have to push back on that, though, because in an era of incredibly sophisticated supply chain analytics, relying on pluses and minuses not in the analysis sounds like a dangerous license to just ignore the data and go with your gut.
It reads like a wild card, I totally agree. But it's actually a vital warning about the limitations of mathematical models. Financial models are exceptionally good at calculating direct costs, but they are terrible at calculating human behavior and systemic fragility.
Give me an example.
Let's use overtime. Your spreadsheet might run a 10-month projection and show that mandating heavy overtime is millions of dollars cheaper than hiring new staff or bringing in an outside contractor. The math works perfectly.
But the math assumes the workers maintain the exact same productivity on hour 60 of the week as they do on hour 10.
Exactly. The unwritten minus, the factor totally absent from the analysis, is the compounding effect of severe employee burnout.
Right, they aren't robots.
No, they aren't. If you mandate heavy overtime for months on end, your defect rate is going to skyrocket because people are just exhausted. Your safety incidents will increase, your most experienced machine operators might quit out of frustration, and you might even trigger a labor strike.
Wow.
And a single labor strike wipes out every penny of savings the spreadsheet promised.
Which highlights why evaluating outside contracting isn't purely a mathematical exercise either. I mean, the analysis might show that outsourcing a subassembly to a third party saves 20% on production costs. But the minus not in the analysis is the risk of handing over your proprietary intellectual property to a contractor who might, eventually become a competitor.
That is the absolute essence of keeping the evaluation grounded in reality. The sources advise leaders to keep it simple. You have to look at the math, obviously, but then apply your organization's specific threshold for risk and human capital strain to that math.
So, assuming a company successfully models the financial data against its organizational reality, they still have to make these agonizing trade-offs. And what really stands out in the source material is that these S&OP trade-offs are dictated heavily by the physical nature of the manufacturing environment itself.
They absolutely are. At the core of every S&OP decision, there are three planning factors locked in this perpetual three-way tug of war.
Okay, what are they?
Customer service level, inventory level, and backlog level. It is mathematically impossible to optimize all three simultaneously.
So if you want immediate customer service, meaning zero wait time for the buyer, you are forced to hold a massive amount of finished inventory, which obviously ties up your working capital.
Right.
And if you refuse to hold inventory to save cash, your backlog explodes, lead times extend, and your customer service metric just tanks.
Precisely. And since our listeners are likely operating in or closely supporting these different manufacturing environments, we don't need to get bogged down in the textbook definitions of make to stock or assemble to order. What's far more interesting is how this three-way tug of war forces companies to swallow very different types of strategic poison depending on how they build their product.
Okay, so let's break this down for the listener with a food analogy.
Oh, nice.
Right. Let's look at the make-to-stock, or MTS, environment first. This is basically the fast food burger sitting ready under a heat lamp. Because the customer expectation is essentially instant delivery, everything relies on the forecast. What's the specific S&OP friction point here?
Well, in an MTS environment, the ultimate risk is a stockout. Because you are producing based on forecasted demand, if the actual demand surges past your projections, your backlog doesn't just grow. Your customer simply leaves.
They just drive to the next burger place.
Exactly. In a true make-to-stock market, brand loyalty is often secondary to availability. If you don't have the product on the shelf, the customer immediately degrades your service level and buys from a competitor. So the trade-off is constantly fighting the fear of stockouts by holding dangerously high levels of inventory.
Now, contrast that with the make-to-order or MTO environment. In our analogy, this is ordering off a standard restaurant menu from scratch.
Right.
You aren't building until the exact order comes in, so you dodge that massive risk of holding finished goods inventory. The customer knows they have to wait, so your primary job is managing expectations.
But there is a huge trap here.
Yeah. The sources highlight a fascinating, incredibly common trap in MTO environments. They note that attempting full utilization of resources might force a company to add make-to-stock components, which risks unacceptable backlogs. Explain the mechanics of that failure, because it sounds crazy.
It is a brilliant example of human psychology breaking a supply chain. In an MTO environment, demand is very lumpy. You might have periods where your expensive machinery and highly paid staff are just sitting idle, waiting for a custom order.
And plant managers hate idle time.
They despise it.
Yeah.
It makes their utilization metrics look terrible. So out of pure anxiety, they decide to churn out standard make-to-stock components just to keep the machines running and hit their utilization KPIs.
They basically start doing work just for the sake of looking busy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the catastrophic trade-off happens when a highly lucrative, real custom make-to-order job finally comes in. But all the manufacturing capacity is tied up producing generic parts that nobody actively ordered. They have created an unacceptable backlog for their core business simply to keep the factory lights blinking. They cannibalize their own capacity.
That perfectly illustrates why optimizing for a single metric like utilization can be so dangerous.
Totally.
Okay, what about the assemble-to-order or ATO environment? This is the build-your-own-burrito bowl line. You have standard sub-assemblies ready to go, and you just configure them based on the final customer order.
Like how Dell revolutionized computers in the 90s.
Right, or modular housing today. You quote a lead time based on the backlog of assembly work. Where is the friction there?
The friction in ATO lies in the hidden inventory risk. It feels safer than make-to-stock because you aren't holding finished, assembled goods. But to provide that rapid assembly speed, you are still holding a massive mountain of individual modules and components.
All the burrito ingredients.
Right. And if market tastes suddenly shift, Say a new technology renders a specific subassembly obsolete, you are left with millions of dollars in highly specialized, completely useless parts that just can't be repurposed.
Ouch. And finally, we have engineer to order, or ETO. This is hiring a personal chef to design a custom wedding cake. It's the realm of custom shipbuilding, specialized aerospace components, heavy machinery.
Very complex stuff.
The engineering work has to happen before you can even establish a realistic delivery estimate.
Yeah. ETO requires intense special order planning. You aren't just managing inventory, you are managing a highly volatile timeline. The massive trade-off and risk here is scope creep and midstream design
The
changes.
customer changes their mind.
Exactly. If the client demands a fundamental change to the engineering specifications halfway through the build, it doesn't just cause a minor delay, it triggers a cascade failure. Materials are wasted, specialized labor is idled while blueprints are redrawn, and it creates massive back orders that disrupt every other ETO project waiting in your queue.
So every environment has its own totally unique way of punishing a bad forecast.
Absolutely.
But let's assume the executive team successfully navigates these risks. They evaluate the baselines, they agree on the trade-offs regarding inventory and customer service, and the final S&OP plan is actually approved. How does that blueprint become reality?
The sources outline a very deliberate three-step execution flow for the supply chain. Step 1 is simply demand. The S&OP process outputs the officially approved production plan, which is strictly based on the demand the company has formally agreed to support.
Like, this is the exact volume target we are committing to.
Right, line in the sand. Step 2 is replenishment. This is where the logistics happen. You ensure that all necessary replenishments are available by producing a detailed master schedule.
Okay.
You're creating the logistics S&OP and the supply plans. You are securing the warehouse space, booking the freight, aligning the raw materials. And finally, step 3 is manufacturing. This is the physical execution of those production plans where you actually build the product. So, demand, replenishment, manufacturing.
I mean, it sounds incredibly logical. It's a clean, linear progression. But the source material spends a huge amount of time detailing how this completely falls apart in the real world.
Oh, it falls apart all the time.
And what's remarkable is that these common planning mistakes apply uniformly across all industry sizes and types. A startup manufacturing specialty electronics falls into the exact same traps as a massive multinational chemical conglomerate. Why do highly intelligent organizations continuously fail at this execution?
Well, the text points to several systemic failures, and most of them stem from a lack of discipline rather than a lack of intelligence. The most foundational failure is simply indecision by senior management.
Paralyzed by choice.
Pretty much. If the leaders are paralyzed by the risks and refuse to commit to a specific trade-off, like if they want high service levels but flat out refuse to approve the inventory budget, the entire S&OP process freezes.
The wish list versus reality problem again. The sources also mention a lack of alignment between corporate strategy and S&OP. I imagine this looks like, a CEO publicly promising Wall Street a 30% market expansion, while the S&OP plan is quietly being managed by an operations team incentivized entirely on cost-cutting and shrinking inventory.
That is a guaranteed collision right there. Another major point of failure highlighted in the text is making a single number plan while omitting the rest of the S&OP process.
Oh, right. Explain the mechanism behind a single number plan. Why is that so destructive?
It happens when an executive team fixates on one vanity metric. For example, mandating we must ship 50,000 units this quarter to hit revenue targets.
Just a blind target.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They force the entire organization to manage to that single number while completely ignoring the complex capacity, labor, and inventory planning required to achieve it safely. They don't update the replenishment schedules. They don't authorize overtime budgets.
But they still expect the 50,000 units.
Yep. And the factory might actually hit the 50,000 units, but they do it by destroying the machinery, burning out the staff, and expediting freight at a massive loss. The number was hit, but the business was damaged.
I see the logic there. It's basically divorcing the goal from the physical reality of the supply chain. The sources also point heavily toward procedural failures. They cite poor S&OP meeting protocol and a lack of regular measurements or consistent metrics.
Yeah, if you do not have standardized, universally agreed upon metrics, your S&OP meetings just degrade into spreadsheet wars.
Oh, spreadsheet wars.
Yeah, the VP of sales brings a spreadsheet showing demand is surging, and the VP of operations brings a different spreadsheet showing demand is flat. Instead of making strategic trade-off decisions, the entire meeting is wasted arguing over whose data pull is accurate.
We have all endured meetings like that. It's brutal.
It is.
There are also strategic blind spots mentioned, like maintaining a short-term view of S&OP, a lack of objectivity, or failing to factor in external business trends or product lifecycle stages. You simply cannot run S&OP for a brand new, highly volatile product launch using the exact same assumptions you use for a mature, declining product.
No, you can't. But honestly, the most frustrating failure modes are entirely behavioral. The sources specifically highlight that plans fail due to competition and office politics that slow or derail success, and leadership that is simply too focused on history.
That is the ultimate irony of this entire process, isn't it? We spend all this time analyzing complex capacity models, calculating the hitting costs of undertime versus overtime, mapping out the precise risks of make-to-order cannibalization.
Doing all the math.
Right. But at the end of the day, a perfectly calculated, mathematically flawless supply chain plan can be completely destroyed because two department heads are actively competing against each other for a promotion. Or because a senior leader shuts down a new logistics model by just crossing their arms and saying, but we've always done it this way.
It really reinforces the reality that supply chain management is fundamentally human behavior management.
Yeah.
If you don't clear away the political friction, enforce the meeting protocols, and actively manage the cognitive biases of your leadership team, the math simply does not matter. The physical execution will fail.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The core takeaway is that S&OP reconciliation is not just an academic exercise for operations planners. It is the vital, messy, and intensely human process of forcing your grand ambitions to actually match physical reality.
It requires pulling complex levers, having the courage to actively manage and sometimes disappoint your customers, and recognizing that mathematical perfection just doesn't exist. There are no flawless plans. There are only managed trade-offs.
And managing those trade-offs means navigating the human element just as rigorously as you navigate the spreadsheets. Which brings me to a final thought I want you to mull over. We discussed how leadership often sabotages the S&OP process because they are too focused on history or they get paralyzed by office politics.
Right.
So consider your own environment. Think about the strategic plans you are trying to execute right now, whether for your department, your business, or your own career. Look critically at the bottlenecks standing in your way. Are the constraints holding back your future plans genuinely physical limitations? Or are they just the ghosts of how you did things in the past? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.